If we were to do, because we had put 350 in the long-term financial plan, so if we were able to do, I guess we can't, I mean, if we are able to do the 307, that technically is taking a chunk out of our long-term financial plan even, because
Saving it.
we're saving that ahead of time.
So the 350, so we also have, there's a air handling unit in that facility too, so that 350 accounted for doing some HVAC work as well in 2026.
Okay.
So I think we'll expend all those funds by the end of the project.
If not, I was wondering if there's anything left in that 350, if that could help fund having the contractor or having, this third party come in and.
Oh, like for the inspection program?
Exactly.
Sure.
What happens if we were down to 2 pumps? So we've got one out. What if one failed right now? What would we do?
It's a good question. We'd have to.
We're all going to
We
Chaska.
have. I mean, there's a lot of storage in that line.
Okay.
It's a 36-inch line, so there's a lot of volume of storage in it.
Okay.
There would have to be a lot of things that would be stacked against us to have
Alright.
like a big issue.
Okay.
But I think they have had 3 pumps on from a time or two from past experiences, what I heard.
3 pumps off?
3 pumps on.
Okay.
So 3 pumps have had to run before.
Well, the options listed, I would definitely support that number 3, replace 2 of the 4 pumps.
Help me out with this one. So it says here that we have sufficient funds in the sewer fund to phase the replacement of all 4 pumps, but 2 in 2025. So
Sounds like they must be phased.
right, so so to say replace all 4 pumps now, that's just future. We're not gonna actually do all 4 pumps right now. We're still just gonna do 2. So even if we say replace number 3, replace 2 of the 4, that's really what we're getting out of this, right?
Yeah, so we have enough cash in the sewer fund to fund $156,000 this year. And then when we have sufficient funding, from the next but cycle, then we'd have enough money to do the last 2.
So does that essentially then take number 4 actually kind of off the table at this point? Because if we can't
Again,
fund it,
I
don't know
can't
if
speak
it's
to that without
Yeah.
having Brent or Lynn in the room, so I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I just don't know the
Do
answer
I-
to that question.
Let's see, I'm not hearing anybody say, no, I don't wanna do
Right.
at least 2 of the pumps.
correct, or at least for me.
I would say let's do at least 2, but maybe we didn't do a cost benefit of doing all 4 right now and everything else you say it, but
That's what
having
I
the
was-
crews in there.
That's what I was gonna say, so,
Yeah.
what I'm hearing is the direction is go ahead and let's replace 2 of the pumps for sure in 2025. But that we want additional information on if we can actually, if we have the funding to be able to afford to do all of them in 2025, or do we have to wait on those last 2 until 2026? I'm seeing a lot of heads.
Yes,
Okay.
agreed.
Okay.
Do we have any major replacement projects in the long-term financial plan for this year for the sewer fund? Or are we just saving up for the pumps for next year right now?
We did, we're doing the Spring Creek lift station pumps.
Okay.
Um,
What are the state of
That-
those, do we know?
they're about 70,000, they need to be replaced, so.
They're
We
under.
actually got quotes for those already, I believe,
Okay.
so.
And then have you looked into the cost of doing regular pump inspections? I know you mentioned it's something you'd like to do going forward, but I
Yeah,
haven't heard any cost numbers on it.
We don't have any numbers on it yet, that's just
Okay.
something that we're gonna, inquire about.
Just putting a bug in our ear.
Correct.
All right, so we will go ahead, you have the support to replace at least 2 of the pumps. We're looking if, I'm wondering if from a financial standpoint, we can do all 4 of them this year
Okay, that sounds
as a
good.
follow-up.
So if option 4 is a valid option, we'll bring it back, to let you know. Otherwise, the next step would be, obviously, we need to get 2 quotes, so this was just kind of a budgetary exercise. So we'll get a second quote then, and then the council would see that, and be able to award a quote would be the next step.
And this is straightforward, it's just a pump, right? There isn't plans and specs and.
Nope, so it's
Okay.
literally just provide the existing pump data on the pump curve and how many gallons per minute it needs to
Okay.
pump, and they give us a quote, and
Okay, all right, thank you.
Although, just to clarify, if you do the all four, since it's gonna exceed the statutory bidding threshold, that would have to be a more formal bidding process where they would advertise and companies would look at it, submit bids.
Okay.
You might get 2, you might get 10, you guys know
Yeah.
how that works, but that would change what they have to go
True.
through. They can't get quotes for something under 175,000, but when you go, once you go above that, you have to actually go out and bid.
Okay, all right. All right.
I think we should chop those up so residents can own a piece of the Carver.
So
You
maybe
know what they do?
You know, we'll just raise at your house, you can have real art.
maybe work a little pieces of it into some Carver brick.
There you go.
Okay,
go.
let's
Yeah.
move on to my favorite topic. Review and discussion for the cannabis dispensary regulation.
Ooh,
Mr.
All right.
Anderson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm gonna share my screen, just so we have something to look at. I'm just gonna pull the packet up, but, so for cannabis, you all know that we, the council approved some, I'm not sure if this is even gonna work. It doesn't.
Are you pulling the packet up?
Yeah,
The
it's
other
the
one.
packet.
Yeah.
try that other one. Sometimes that one's finicky. That adapter.
The council approved zoning regulations at the end of 2024 because of the legalization of recreational cannabis. And so now there's some rules in place for where businesses can establish once licensing starts at the state level. I'm gonna have Aaron bring it up. So the one piece that we kind of kicked into the first part of this year was one other component the city has to consider, and that's who will handle retail registration for cannabis and hemp retail businesses. State law will require, or does require, any business that wants to sell cannabis products or hemp products to register with the local government that they are operating in. And many cities are handling the registration piece, but it is an administrative burden, and cities can, under the statute, defer that registration piece to the counties that they're located in. Staff has been in discussions with Carver County for the last few months. They've been actually very transparent about their plans, and they went through a process and adopted an ordinance that will actually allow them to not only handle registration for any of the cities and towns that are in the county, but also they've imposed the limitation on the number of dispensaries per city. So given the size of Carver, we could theoretically, as a city, if we handled registration, limit the amount of dispensaries to just one, because we have less than 12,500 people. Most cities have to do registration if they want to impose those limits. Carver County is one of the few counties that is actually enforcing those on behalf of cities if they want to defer the registration to the county, which takes an administrative burden off of staff. It also will allow the county to sort of streamline this. It's just like they do tobacco licensing for a lot of cities and towns as well. And keep in mind, this registration is a very, I want to call it like, licensing light, if that, because the state is licensing these retail businesses and cities have very little regulatory oversight from that standpoint, but this local registration piece is one thing that that the city does have the ability to do. So I did prepare, I talked to Brent at length about this. We have a person from Carver County who's planning to attend the meeting on the 21st of this month to just present the county's registration program and talk a little bit about how they're going to be doing it. But as we approach that meeting, I wanted to have a discussion with this council about one, whether you are supportive, and I think we've even talked about this a little bit in the past, whether you're supportive of the county handling the registration. And then there's a couple other things that I did include in the ordinance that I think are important. Two other things specifically. One is a provision in there just clarifying.
Do you mind if we just jump
Yeah, we
out?
can absolutely take a break.
Okay.
Yeah, let's talk about retail
Okay,
registration.
let's talk about retail registration before we go on. So I think what I'm hearing you say is regardless if we handle it or if we have the county handle it, it will be one license for the city of Carver because we are 7,000 people and not 12,501 people.
Yes, unless we handled it and chose not to limit it,
Okay.
Which we could do. And one main reason cities are saying we absolutely want to handle registration is so they can enforce that limit, because a lot of counties just aren't focused on localities, specifically in cities and towns. They're more worried about county-wide limits, but yes, they will enforce that, and in fact, their ordinance already has that built into the framework of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have no concern with the county doing it.
Remind me, I know we've asked this question, but does the county charge us back for administering this?
Nope.
Okay.
No, they're gonna handle it. They can collect a registration fee. It's a statutorily capped number from all the registration, but that pays for things that they do like compliance checks and processing the paperwork. It's not a money-making endeavor really. So, again, I don't see much, if any, value to handling registration, knowing that the county is willing to enforce the limitation. What I would say is that we always have the ability to do it on our own if we wanted to change our ordinance. The only value to doing that, I think, would be if for some reason, one, we think the county's doing a bad job and we want to do it, or two, we want to get rid of a dispensary cap, and or vice versa, the county chooses in the future for some reason to get rid of it and we want to keep it. But those are things that are kind of to be determined, and I just want to say that you're not stuck to whatever decision you make today. You can always change if things aren't working for some reason.
Has the county formally passed their ordinance on I know you said they intend to do this, but have they
I think
formally?
they have.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can double check with him when he's at the meeting. His name's David Frischman, and I believe they have. We saw a draft of it a month or two ago, and it was working its way through the county board review and approval
Yeah.
process.
I wouldn't want to sign on to a regulatory scheme that we don't have any certainty of what it actually is.
Sure. Yeah, and we can confirm, and if it's been approved, we can get a copy of it and just
That'd be great.
give it to
Thank
the
you.
council before we do it.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with the county doing that work for us. Unless Aaron really wants it.
Gets that part, what she gets. Lori, thoughts?
I think it's a great idea to have the county oversee the regulatory part of it.
Yeah, it sounds like we're in a unique position with Carver County, and there's no risk to us. Why wouldn't we do that?
All right, I think you have a direction for that one.
Sure. The second one, it's pretty clear. I'm not necessarily asking for much direction on it, but I wanted to go over it because it is going to be in the ordinance. State law requires any business before they get a license from the state for any cannabis related business, whether a retail or another type of business, to submit a form to the local zoning authority, and the city's zoning staff would then review it and confirm, one, that they comply with local zoning before they create their business and establish, and two, that they meet all building code, fire code, those kinds of things. I'm recommending just putting language in here stating that that's the community development director's responsibility, or that department, to do that, just to provide that transparency to staff, to people who want to know who to submit these things to. And again, it's pretty straightforward language. I don't know if you looked at the draft ordinance, but I put that in there because I feel it's helpful and important, and I like to tell Erin what she has to do. So, so that one should be straightforward. But let me know if you have questions, and then I can move on to the next piece. So
This is just the checks and balances, so that we don't get somebody saying, we're gonna break ground on a weed shop right next to Next Steps.
exactly, or to say, hey state, give us a license, and the state says, do you comply with zoning? Can you create your business there? And they say, yes, of course we can, but they're full of it, or they're wrong. I mean, they want someone looking at that from the city to say, yes, indeed, they can operate there. So yes, you're right about that.
All right, I have zero concerns with you telling me what.
It's usually the other way around, so.
That's probably true. So the last item is.
Could we just, before we, any concerns with that?
Do we trust Aaron?
It's a tough crowd for you today.
Yeah, sorry,
It's like Brent is gone now.
No concerns.
Okay,
She's gonna tell us to
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, the last piece, these temporary cannabis events, we were reading about them, the statute allows for them. We don't really know what they're gonna look like yet. They allow for temporary events to take place. They can last up to 4 days long. And the purpose is really to allow people to come together. You can buy these products. You can use the products during the events if the city allows you to use the products. Again, we haven't really seen this yet, so we don't know if they're gonna be taking place outdoors, or if they're gonna be indoors, if there's gonna be some significant influx of these events. I don't feel like this is a very significant issue because I think these events are gonna take place sporadically and it's not gonna be a let's have 50 events in Carver this year, especially because you can only have up to 4 days long for each event. And keep in mind, to organize and hold these events, you do have to have a state license, which is going to require a number of different requirements to be adhered to before you get that license and operate. But the point of the provisions, which are totally optional, the point really is just to impose any regulations that the council may desire putting on these events. Keep in mind, we have a large event ordinance already, so that would be triggered if the event is the size or would take up any public resources or require street closures. So I'm not suggesting or proposing that we have any separate permitting process for these events, because if it's gonna trigger the large event ordinance, that permit would be required. But I did include a few things that some cities are adopting. I'll scroll down just to show you what they look like. But they're pretty straightforward. I mean, first and foremost, prohibiting them on city property. That is simply for legal liability reasons. The city doesn't necessarily have insurance to allow these types of events, and I don't know what that would even look like. So if any organizers ever want to do that in a city, a lot would have to happen, and I think the League of Minnesota Cities would have to think about its insurance, liability insurance, and if that could even happen. So that one's pretty straightforward. Another one is that they shouldn't occur in residentially zoned areas. I limited the hours here in the draft to the same hours that you allow for your zoning ordinance that was recently adopted, the sale of cannabis to take place. I don't know if that's reasonable to the council or not, but I felt like it sort of made sense to mirror those hours. Let me know if you feel differently.
Does anyone know off the top of their heads what our hours are for amplified noise events?
Would go by MPCA.
We don't-
Okay.
Yeah, the city doesn't have any noise regulations beyond MPCA standards. And then D there is a prohibition for on-site consumption. Now that's, again, totally optional. A lot of cities are saying you can have these events, you can celebrate these products and sell them, do whatever you want to do, but we really don't want, use and smells and other things to affect neighboring property owners or other people that are nearby. And then E and F those are the same buffers that we implemented for the freeway commercial district, 1,000 feet from schools and the 500 feet from daycare.
For this one, I would like to see, we exempted the central business district already, so I would like to see that exemption mirrored in this, because I don't think it makes sense to have it in one and not have it in the other.
My concern too is if we're having, so I'm thinking about if something were to be grandfathered in, daycare moves in after the cannabis shop. I'm thinking about if you've ever been in the cycling community, they have a lot of bike events in the parking lot. Is this going to have it so that a cannabis dispensary that has been grandfathered in can no longer have an open house or street sale, sidewalk sale in their own area of business, just because the daycare has already since they have moved into the same area?
It would mean they can't have a temporary cannabis event, which is a separate statutory thing than their dispensary business.
Okay, I'll have to look into exactly what the definition of that is, because I can think of a lot of things that would fall under that category that you'd want to be able to do
I don't
right
think
outside your shop.
I don't think they can sell outside their shop with their normal dispensary license. So if they wanted to have a temporary cannabis event, and I don't know if even they would be able to do it unless they got that other license.
Okay.
that they'd be able to do it unless we didn't have buffers. But this is, I mean, these temporary events aren't gonna have a grandfathering issue because they're temporary by nature. They're not anything that you establish permanently. So this isn't really a zoning or a nonconformity issue.
I'm not worried about it as a nonconformity issue. I'm worrying about it as like as a business. If you're going to have an event, typically you want to have it near your business, near your store, right? You know, you're not going to want to have to go all the way across town. And if you have established your store in one location, a year later, daycare has moved in. Now you're precluded from having any events near your dispensary.
A temporary cannabis event, if the council approved.
Okay.
Yep, if the council
Okay.
approved buffers.
So I need to look into what all is covered by the temporary cannabis event.
Well, and like I said, we don't really know what these look like yet.
Oh, I know.
I don't think anybody does.
I highly doubt that
until
we're
they
going to
start.
have like the Steamboat Days of cannabis events happening down here. So, but I do think that it's important to mirror this to say that we're exempting the central business district no different than we did in the other
I
ordinance.
agree with that.
I think that's fair.
Okay.
Is that something that we can do?
Yeah, and then the only other thing I have on there, G, that's just, you have to also adhere to all state and local laws, which is straightforward. And then I put a specific reference in there to the large event ordinance, which is in chapter 10, article 4. And then the statutory reference to the cannabis event statute, which is 34240. One thing that I did not include on here, some cities are saying it, others aren't, but cities that are really trying to discourage these events from being located in their city are saying you have to have these events inside of a building. They don't want them outdoors. And I think there's a valid public argument if the city wants to institute that kind of thing, that you can do it for just public health, safety, welfare reasons.
I have no interest in that.
And yeah, that's up to,
I have no
that's up to
interest
the
in
council.
that.
Again, I didn't include it on here,
Yeah.
but I'm pointing it out as something you may see if you look at other city ordinances, because some cities are doing that. But, again, I don't wanna make this section, I mean, I think it's important, but I don't know how often we're gonna be looking at this section, in Carver. I don't necessarily think we're gonna be the capital of temporary cannabis events. And I also think just in general, these events are gonna be relatively few and far between. That said, these are some of the more standard provisions that we're seeing. So I figured, let's start here, and if you wanna pick and choose or do them all, or Christy and other folks are, it sounds like on board with, we can carve out the central business district from the buffers, that's fine.
I agree with the first two, but that third component, the final one,
Which one
is optional, temporary cannabis events. I would not, I don't see, I prefer to keep that out. I don't see that should be in there.
So the whole section?
Yeah, the temporary cannabis events.
Why, Tori?
We do have the, large event ordinance that I think would cover it.
That doesn't say anything about cannabis.
Right, but it covers as far as like what would be required from the city, for, barriers or support or how many days and,
So the ordinance now saying that you can't open your shop within 1,000, we'll just use 1,000 feet from school. That wouldn't have any bearing on someone doing an event within 1,000. So this is what's covering that.
Correct,
Okay,
yeah,
so that the other ordinance doesn't play into this.
Yeah, the other ordinance only relates to actual brick and mortar
Okay.
retail, like like an off-sale liquor store. It's gonna be a dispensary, and this is just for these short-term events, which are, like I said, they're gonna be in one time, they're gonna be sporadic in terms of timing and also from their locations. I don't know where they're gonna be located or where they're gonna wanna do these things, but time to tell.
I feel like we've already made a commitment to establish this 1,500 foot distance through the ordinance. I think this needs to mirror that. I agree, keeping the central business district open, but if we pull this out, then we've kind of created a back door to hold a cannabis event next to a school, which I don't think the school's gonna be happy about.
I see what you're saying, Eric, yeah, because if you say, okay, you can't have the brick and mortar building there, but you can have the event right next to it instead. It doesn't, they don't jive to me, like saying, okay, one's fine, but that back door.
See, my thing about it is I'm thinking about it from like if this weren't cannabis, let's say this were alcohol, right? So instead of this being a temporary cannabis event, what if this was a like local microbrew beer tasting? I know it's not apples to apples because there's no consumption and all of those sorts of things, but you know, would we be arguing that a weekend event within 500 feet of an elementary school, is that really going against the spirit of not having a liquor store within 500 feet of an elementary school? Does that, I guess they're
No,
not
I see
exactly the
what,
same.
that's what I'm thinking of as well, I've thought of it from that term.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think it's also important to remember that these could be up to 4-day events, so it wouldn't necessarily be just limited to a weekend.
Yeah. Which is why I need to look more into what is all covered by the temporary cannabis events.
That's what we're
Statute.
determining.
No, I'm not talking about I'm saying what is that defined as at the state level?
Yeah, I think that's some of the issues that
Yeah.
we're running up against, and that's really frustrating from sitting on the side of the issue, is that it's really nebulous at this point.
Yeah.
And the league's been doing a great job as stuff gets passed down to kind of deciphering it and translating it and cutting it off into bite-sized chunks for us, but at this point, I think, we have to determine what we want. I definitely wanna make sure that this is part of, the ordinance that we're working on right now. I agree with amending E and F so that it mirrors our ordinances to where you can sell. Just so that I understand, events are banned on city property, and, let's see, D prohibits on-site consumption regardless of what we say in here, that's already because of this state statute
No,
that you
it's,
cited in
that
there.
statute allows cities to prohibit it.
Okay,
So the pursuant to means pursuant to the authority that we're given to
Okay.
make that decision in that provision and subdivision 8, that we're choosing to do that. You don't have to prohibit on-site consumption.
Okay. I would like to see the prohibition of on-site consumption kept in there. Any other thoughts, Eric? You mentioned.
So again, I'm repeating the same thing. I agree with have it mirror the ordinance we've already adopted. I don't see a reason to pull any of these things out. I think that's in conflict with the ordinance we just passed. And I don't think schools want to see banners that close to the school for a 4-day event. So the 1,000 and 500 feet barriers make sense to me.
I mean, technically, they could, let's say they could go to Fleet Farm and say, we're gonna rent your parking lot, and
Mhm.
we're gonna have it up there.
Yep.
That's no big deal.
Sure.
And that's totally.
Yeah, I think private parking lots are gonna be places where these events happen, convention centers and indoor, there'll be some indoors too. I mean, on-site consumption will be, not work for the indoor places because of the Minnesota Clean Air Act and all that. At least with respect to the actual smoke or vaping of things. But, for the outdoor events, it certainly would. And you're right about the parking lot example.
And that's helpful to think about, like Fleet Farm wouldn't have any buffers because schools and daycares aren't near it. But thinking about Carver Square has been helpful for me even in this discussion. So if someone rented like Mizzy's to throw a party, it's close to O2B kids. So that's the change with the buffers. If you want to include them, you couldn't rent Mizzy's or Strive Nutrition or the vet clinic if the buffers are imposed. Sure.
And I guess for me, having it where you can't consume on site, because I've been thinking about this trying from both sides. Like again, if it was alcohol, what would we feel about this? But alcohol doesn't travel through the air,
Yeah,
right?
that's
So you could have
It's not a nuisance in the
you
same
could have 50 people smoking weed and it's drifting over to ABC residential
Yeah.
house, right? So alcohol isn't going to walk through the air. So for me, I'm okay with the non-consumption on site because I think you just can't contain that that off-put from the cannabis.
And again, with any of this stuff, if we decide we've made a mistake, we can always retract and change this, but
You say we're not perfect, Eric?
I'm not saying I'm not perfect.
I have a feeling that even when you're not making policy changes, there's gonna be tweaks to these ordinances that are gonna be, naturally have to happen, just knowing
As the state gets
the
everything
unknown
together.
as they,
Mhm.
as they decide how they wanna
Yeah.
do things.
When.
Because we're all kind of blindly adopting rules and regulations because cities want to do it before they start licensing, but we also don't know how they're gonna
Right.
function. They still don't have a director even, and now they kicked the can down the road on all the lotteries and things, if you saw that in the news. So yes, we can, and we probably will, at least if not for policy things, for technical changes, so.
I think too, like, we're doing the best we can with the information we have. So it's like, there may be things we revisit.
Yep.
I think this is really hard because to me, if it's legal, right? And alcohol's legal and they're not that different, but we are getting thrown, well, nothing to very little from
It's,
the
I
state.
feel like there's just a lot with the stigma.
There is, for sure.
You know, and we wanna be inclusive. And for some people, the odor's a nuisance, but also, for some people, a grill cooking red meat is a nuisance. So it's like,
Especially
we
if you're
really,
hungry, right?
or if
If
you're
you're
opposed,
vegan,
if you're
yeah.
vegan, I mean,
Morally
there's some,
opposed,
yeah,
yeah.
morally
Meat.
opposed.
Or
So it is
whatever.
try to like, keep that on the outside and just, you know, what's good for the city, balancing for the city's responsibility, what do the residents want? We still wanna embrace business opportunities, and then, yeah, have some regulations that we can enforce or with the county's partnership enforce.
And I think it's really fair to say we're gonna end up looking at this again, one way or the other, because things will come out of the state eventually, that we're gonna have to review this. And maybe we say, you know what, some of this was just unnecessary, it doesn't need to be this restrictive, some of the stigma of it has gone away, and the state's figured out.
So I have a question for you, Dave, in the research, so that third, the first time I saw it was in the packet came out, the temporary. Was there anything else that like would have been a fourth, or like, oh, I heard little rumblings, or like one city did this, like,
On the ordinance, like
Yeah.
another? No, I mean, my goal with
like you
this-
can't walk your dog and do it at the same time?
No.
I always come to dogs when I try to think of an example,
Keep
but
in
like,
mind, didn't we-
anything that like,
This was a couple of years ago, but the
Could
council
come up.
already prohibited this in city parks, on sidewalks, and the use of it outdoors. So this is generally consistent with that notion, given the fact that a lot of these events will probably be proposed for outdoor things, but no, I don't, nothing jumps to mind.
Okay.
So outdoor consumption, so if there would be an outdoor event, even if we weren't to have a prohibition of consumption, they would not be allowed to consume based on our current city ordinances.
No, that's just on
That's
public
just could be
streets
for
and
in,
sidewalks
okay,
and
just
public
public stuff,
parks,
okay,
yeah.
so if they were in Fleet Farm parking lot, they'd
Yeah.
still be able to.
People can go in their backyard and do it, you can do it
Yeah.
on private property.
Okay.
That was just a kind of a public safety measure to keep it off streets and, away from maybe kids that are walking on the sidewalk and
Yeah.
at parks where there's.
Sit at playgrounds, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do we have, is there anything equivalent, I'm trying to think, cause we're talking about the nuisance issue, right, that we don't have quite with alcohol. Do we have a similar type of temporary event for tobacco based?
No, to be honest, I don't know if these are gonna take off. I don't think there's a big push to have tobacco parties and events. I think this is really coming from the legislature. They maybe saw what other states are doing as they were legalizing this.
Yeah.
I think there was maybe a big push for some of these events as like a celebration, because there are people out there that are like, really gung-ho about their weed. And so they're having these, events. This could be a fad and it could last a year or two and maybe we'll never see them again, but I think that's probably why we don't see them for tobacco. It's because that's really always been legal,
Yeah.
at least for adults to use, and tobacco shops exist all over the place, including the type where you can go and try products and
Yeah.
smoke them and do all
Smoking
those kinds of
rooms and all
things.
of that.
Yeah, so I'm not aware of the same sort of framework for tobacco.
Okay.
Do you have the direction you need
I do,
from us on
yes.
this? Okay.
I do, thank you.
All right. Let's skip ahead to legislative priorities. Review and discussion of our 2025 legislative priorities. So, I can tee this up. Every year, as you guys know, Caleb, this is something we do annually. We just kind of take a look at what we want to let our folks know, who we have elected and are sending to St. Paul, what is important to us in the city of Carver. So once these are approved, which will generally take place, I think, at our next meeting, Brent always sends this to Representative Harder and Senator Gruenhagen. So taking a look at this, a lot of this stuff isn't brand new. The first one on the list is the support of local decision-making. I think, Council, you guys remember last year that there was some pretty alarming legislation that was proposed at the state level as it dealt with preempting local control of zoning regulations, which thankfully didn't get passed, but I think this is kind of the number one kind of umbrella support of local decision-making. Like, humbly, we know our communities better than the folks in St. Paul or somebody who's from Duluth or whatever. So want to make sure that we protect that. We're always seeking funding for the levy system. It's a $13 million project that we have about $9.5 million already identified for, but we still need some money. Last year was supposed to be a bonding year, and unfortunately, there was not a bonding bill. So continuing to ask for that, that's number 2. Remote participation in city council meetings. Right now, the way it stands, Kayla, is if any of us want or need to participate remotely, we have to share our address, and if Joe Public wants to come, you've got to let them into your kitchen table to sit next to you if you want.
It's weird.
Regardless.
Weird.
Or your hotel lobby, or.
Have somebody come or just having to share the address?
You just have,
Yeah.
sharing the
Okay,
address
but it kind of
is
is like-
so weird, like, if you're in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania,
And you're
like.
probably
someone
watching,
from-
okay, or
I'm at
somebody
the
coming.
Holiday Inn
Yeah.
in Erie, Pennsylvania, and
exactly-
that, now I have to sit in the lobby.
Yes.
Like, I'm aware of this
And
law.
we
I'm
all
very
do.
aware of this law.
And, you know,
I did one for a client a couple weeks, at another city a couple weeks ago, the guy was participating from Georgia, not the state of Georgia, the Republic of Georgia.
Oh.
And believe it or not, nobody showed up at his hotel lobby to watch him do the council meeting in the country of Georgia.
At like 4 in the
Interesting.
morning.
It was
Oh.
it was 2:15 in the morning or something like that, yeah.
The other thing is like potentially, I think you've used this where you've had some health concerns and you might not want to have somebody when you're wearing your pajama pants, you know, on the other end of the Zoom. So that is number 3. Number 4 is pretty self-explanatory. And then Minnesota paid leave law, that's kind of the please don't give us any more unfunded mandates.
I would like to talk about that one.
Okay.
So they enacted the earned sick and save time. And can you talk a little bit more about what is the Minnesota paid leave? Like, is that, because I mean, I have ESST at my job, but I don't know what the Minnesota paid leave is.
Yeah, so this is very similar to unemployment. The state is creating like a pool of funds that every single employee and employer actually pays into. We talked about this very briefly when we renewed the union contract a couple weeks ago, because there was a provision in there that says the city is gonna pay those premiums. So there's a payroll tax, much like unemployment, cities pay into this, and every employer throughout the state pays into this big fund. And then when an employee wants to take paid leave due to circumstances that would trigger it under the law, they are eligible to do it, and then they would be paid a percentage of their salary during that time from that pool. So it's almost like, again, the unemployment pool, where the money's coming from a state-run fund. It's going to build up a huge balance, and then when any employee throughout the state wants to rely on it or needs to rely on it, they would be able to do that. And it's still sort of changing a little bit. It doesn't go into effect until technically 2026. So it goes into effect at the very beginning of next year. But we expect like little tweaks here and there because there's a lot of imperfections, and the legislature, believe it or not, didn't really think through how it would impact all employers, even though it applies to all employers, like public entities, for example.
Yeah.
A lot of public entities already provide some of these benefits to their employees. And
So the earned,
unfortunately-
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So the earned safe and I am not necessarily in favor of including that in these legislative priorities. I think if you are healthy and your family's healthy, you don't think about this until you are taking someone to the doctor and you are needing to be off for something that might be out of sick time. Now, if you're a very tenured employee, you may have a lot of sick time built up, but if you're newer and spouse or mother or whatever comes down with something where you're taking them to, I'm just throwing out, you're driving to chemo treatments or you have these other things going on, I don't think that is a bad supplement to our employees. The paid leave one with it's similar to the unemployment one, that one I can take or leave, but for me that earns sick and safe time when you are helping out family members. Again, you might not think of it when you're younger or you're in good health. I think it's a very important thing to have, and I think the state did a good job by supplying this and thinking, okay, a little outside the box here, but if you're taking care of a family member, now you could be burning up all of your sick time. So what happens when you're sick now because you burned it all up taking a family member somewhere?
So our time off, we have PTO,
Mhm.
which is sick and vacation time, and then we have a catastrophic sick bank. And in that bank, you can only use it for pretty specific things. So you can't use catastrophic sick for a cold, but you can use it if for all of those things. So
Yeah. But for me, this is bigger than saying City of Carver, because if we're asking the state of Minnesota to take this out, not every city has catastrophic sick banks, right? You get your so many hours, they're capped at the end of the year. If you don't, you lose them, whatever it might be. And that this allows people to have an opportunity to care for someone in their household that they may not be able to without taking, not being paid for it because they run out of sick time for it. And not every business allows a share program where you can give it to another employee. So I just think, for me, that one is a hard one to pull out of here. Or not to pull out of here, but to put in here to say, Minnesota State Legislature, we want you to change this.
And I don't think that's the goal. Like the last sentence here, I think is impactful. So it's specifically to exempt cities because we're using taxpayer dollars to pay into that fund.
Still not on board with it.
That's-
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
Have we calculated what the impact is to Carver when this goes through? Do we know that?
I don't think so.
Which one, the ESST or the?
Well, whatever the cost will be as a result of this. Because we have to pay into a fund.
It's like a 0.07% payroll tax, I believe. And that was the original number floated, but it might change a little bit because there was some study done by the state. And of course, the number they included was not going to be enough. So
For the paid leave, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
And
for the certified
ESST
level,
is
right.
already a thing, yeah.
The SST is already in place. That one, I just pulled it up to remind myself, but that one, it's, to Aaron's point, it's relatively wide. It's a pretty wide array of things you can use it for. Like if your kid's school is canceled because of weather, you can use it because you need to stay home with them and they don't have care, and domestic abuse situations and mental health situations, all kinds of different things that I think the catastrophic leave wouldn't cover. And so just for all of your information, and that's been in place for 2 years now. This is year number 2 or 3 of it. That's starting now, and it's sort of a bank of time. And then I think if employees don't use it, it just kind of grows a little bit every year, but then it gets wiped at some point. So I don't remember all the
The
details.
sick and save time, I think it's
Yes.
use it or lose it per year, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I think it gets wiped at some point if you
Yeah.
don't use it.
I would be fine putting forward the Minnesota paid leave, but I would like to see the earned sick and safe time taken out of this.
Courtney, is this a League of Minnesota Cities initiative?
That's a really good question. I would imagine it's one of their legislative priorities,
Yeah.
but I would have to double check.
I wonder if that just impacts other cities more than it does us, and that's why it's an initiative.
Yeah, so clearly there are ones in here that I feel way more strongly about. If you guys have heard me talk about Ullevig, you know that that's.
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna argue that one.
But this one, I think, I agree with you on all the things about when you're young, you don't realize what a benefit it is, but when you need to attend doctor's appointments and how, an hour's doctor's appointment, and if you have to drive an hour to get there, that's 3 hours of your day and how that impacts folks. I do like this because I think that what it's saying is just kind of looking at the bolded part at the bottom is making cities exempt from this because this is a requirement that's coming down from the state that we are passing along to taxpayers, and it's gonna cost our residents more to do this when, and it could be different at the city of Carver or at any one of the employers that we have within the city of Carver. But we already have a generous catastrophic sick bank, and we give paid time off, which is really fair to all of our employees at the city level, all of our full-time employees. So I think that's what I'm honing in on. If we've removed earned sick and safe time, I don't have any concern with that and focused on Minnesota paid leave. But for me, it's coming from a place of unfunded mandate, and then we don't want that we're against that.
Yeah, the earned sick and safe time, I mean, I guess we're paying out as you would pay out for any other sick time. I don't know, I feel really personally strongly about keeping the safe and sick out. If we wanna go forward with the paid leave, I am all on board with that one.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Courtney, I think, I'm just curious and I'm kind of pinch hitting for Brent tonight, so that's why I keep chiming in. It's not a legal policy thing, so forgive me, because I know I'm not a policymaker, that's your job. But the paragraph is sort of just a, kind of an introduction. The bold language, the italicized bold language in blue is really sort of the legislative directives or legislative priorities. Is that correct? And I think if I'm hearing
That's the way I'm reading it, I think that.
Christie, it's like we don't want to use ESST as the example here. Maybe we use paid leave as one of these. It kind of comes back to the zoning thing last year. It's like we as the city should decide what we spend money on and what benefits we give our employees. You shouldn't tell us what those things are because it's taxpayer money and we're the local elected officials who get to make those calls or should get to make those calls.
I agree with Christie Mock as far as taking that part out. So in the packet, it's on page 13 of the packet, but there the league has the things about the difference in the two. I would, and after just kind of skimming over that, I agree with Christie. I would feel different if employees were coming to us or if we were, hearing through their department heads like, wow, like it would have been really nice if they had, this extra bucket of, earned sick and safe time, I just don't feel like it's a need. So
Did I hear, so just make sure I heard you, so you would be for putting the Minnesota paid leave forward, but removing the
Yes.
sick and safe time?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so too, the mandates at times conflict not only with each other, but existing laws. And at first I thought it was more for big cities too, but it talks about it can be burdensome for the smaller cities. Yeah, I would feel really different if we were hearing that people didn't have that work-life balance or, somebody who's negative in their PTO.
Eric, clearly I didn't scroll far enough in the packet, but as Lubert pointed out, all of the league's 2025 priorities are in there. I don't know that I
Yeah.
can search that document, but
That's
I'm
all right.
almost positive that it's.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing. It's page 107 of the League of Minnesota's document, but it's page 113 in our packet.
So, yes, it is a priority from the league. But clearly, as you can see, the league has hundreds.
Hundreds of pages.
Hundreds of constituents and,
Well,
with
but
different
they have,
needs.
but yeah, it's priorities, and when we went through this, it was quite the issues to tackle. But what we're doing is distilling and just saying, so our representatives are getting this from the league, but then they're getting this from us that is Carver-centric. All right. Kayla, do you have any thoughts?
I support the language as it's currently written. I think anything we can do to allow us as a city to be able to best serve our employees without input from people who aren't dealing with our employees on a day-to-day basis is a good thing. So,
You know, I agree with Christie's assessment of the need for this, but since we do these things as a city, it's an additional burden to our taxpayers to have another level of support that we aren't making a decision about. So I actually agree with the language the way it is. If we didn't provide these services, if we didn't have that bank for our employees, I would have a different opinion. But I think we make provisions.
Oh, geez, love you.
All right, so I think, Lori, I'm sorry, what was your opinion on this, leaving it as is?
I would support having Minnesota paid leave, but I'm not super strong on it. But I don't think that we need to have the earned sick at the same time.
Okay.
So the language
that.
here would eliminate it.
From the proposed resolution.
Lori, are you saying pull out the earned sick and save time from this resolution? I'm not tracking.
To paid leave include. So the city, we encourage legislative to eliminate the expansion of mandated benefits in excess of what? So I would eliminate the expansion of, I guess I'd really,
You want
Okay,
that
maybe
power
I can make
to
this
be more-
easier, I can support as written. Because I think really this is the narrative, our ask. And maybe, because we're stumbling with this, I wonder if we don't kind of flip these when they're presented, where it says, number 5, Minnesota paid leave law, and then our ask is really clear, that the bold paragraph is at the top. The city of
Yeah.
Carver
'Cause it's
encourages
trying to
the
eliminate.
legislature to eliminate, and then we can have the narrative.
I agree.
But
I
it's
like that.
eliminating the expansion. So it's not asking to eliminate, if I read that correctly. We're encouraging the legislature to eliminate expansion of the mandated benefits in excess of what's legally required. So this is saying, okay, but don't go any further.
So I read it.
Okay, I'm fine with that. If we make that more prominent, then,
Yeah.
and maybe there's a little wordsmithing that has to happen in here to make that.
in the
prominent.
narrative.
And I think throughout, it's the issue, our ask, and then the narrative, so everything is flipped.
I think
consistently
that's a
throughout.
more consistent.
Just because we're stumbling on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
fine with that because we're fine where you're at, don't exceed it.
Okay, okay, so I think the direction that we
Okay, we
have
got there.
is that, with the exception of making the changes of having the ask placed right after the bullet, keeping as is. Okay.
Is there any feedback in 1 through 4? Or do you want additional information?
Then do we flip them all though, so they all
Yeah,
make
for
it?
sure,
Okay.
we'll make the format the same throughout.
Back to number 1, just since you've had some additional exposure to it. Did that die on the vine? Where are we with local decision making?
It died on the vine, the specific
Yeah.
stuff that was being proposed last year, but we absolutely expect to see it again
Really?
this year. in the-
It comes in a wave. It happens, it dies, it happens, it dies.
Okay.
So having something I think is important and helpful.
Is there a
And-
champion, a different champion that will take this up, do we expect? Or did we just have somebody with a loud voice last year?
I think it's a little bit of playing defense, depending
Okay.
on what comes out. Because last year it was zoning. I think it's still gonna continue to be a zoning issue based off of some of the interests that are at play in St. Paul. But I think, it could be other issues, because really, the earned sick, the one that we just spent so much time debating on, the
Mhm.
Minnesota paid leave law, that's an unfunded mandate, and that's kind of
Right.
folks telling us what to do with our policies here in the city of Carver. So if it doesn't take the form of zoning bills, it could very easily be
It was
something else.
park
and that's okay.
dedication a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Building permit fees
Yeah.
before that.
It's always something.
Well, it's really important, so I mean, it should be number one. And next to the levy, which should be number 1 point.
So Brent showed me a draft of this, and I think levy might have been number one, but I just think that because local decision-making is such an umbrella issue that
Yeah.
maybe they'll tell us that levies now need to be 30 feet tall across the state, you know, like,
Yeah.
no, let us make our own decisions. So I think that that needs to be the first thing that our elected officials see, because it's just with levy being number two. Okay, let's see. I
Any
think we're
others?
all good on that, unless we have any others that we need to provide feedback on.
Thanks for going through that. Just in Brent's absence, I think we can keep this moving along, just at a discussion level.
Okay, let's see, up next we have vehicle and parking operations, but I think we will wait, for that for our next, work session when Brent is back.
I'm happy to take it tonight. I talked to him and he said,
Oh.
if there's time and you guys wanna talk about it, I helped him on these things and I would be
Okay.
drafting the ordinance, so we can
Okay.
get it done.
Yeah, all right,
Um,
let's tackle it.
Yeah, so the first is engine braking. There's been some concerns from a couple, handful of residents in Wildwood Glen and Oak Tree neighborhoods related to loud noises coming from these semi-trucks. And there's an issue with our code language right now, and the sheriff is saying we can't enforce it. We looked at it, we talked to the sheriff's office. I found some better language that other cities are using, and so we proposed some different language here that the sheriff has signed off on. And we also worked with Paul to make sure that, Paul Schultz, to make sure that we kind of understood how these engine brake systems work, because I'm certainly not an expert, Brent's not either. And we came up with this language, if the council is interested in, you know, changing that language so that the sheriffs have the ability, the deputies have the ability to actually enforce it, we can do that, and we would also consider, when we adopt the ordinance, the council may be authorizing the purchase of some signage that would go out there that's, you know, makes everyone know that, especially on JCP or some of the more well-traveled roadways, that using your brake systems in a way, unless it's an emergency, when you can prove it, and you need to do it, is unlawful, because it's really loud and a lot of times it happens in the middle of the night, so.
If that
That's
is
the first
something
one.
that the sheriff's department can enforce, I am all
I
in favor
agree.
of it.
I feel like engine braking is one of those things, you know it when you see it, or you know it when you hear it.
Yeah.
You don't see anything, yeah, you know it when you hear it,
Yeah.
but, wow, so many different, adjectives for it, so.
Okay, just
I
in
have
the
no
interest of
questions, I
time.
think this looks good.
I agree with it. Can be a difficult thing though, because a lot of those trucks are set to automatic, which means the driver has to actively disengage it.
Yeah, but they have to for a lot of
Yeah.
other cities too, there's
They
no
do.
reason why they can't do it.
That's why
here.
we need the sign.
We are at Ansky.
And a lot of times the threat of just being pulled over and confronted about it with these truckers who are trying to hit deadlines and, you know, meet their miles and all that, is a big enough deal to prevent it, even if you can't ticket them, but I do think it would help.
Yeah,
So-
even with, especially with e-logs, logging them out.
Okay, on street parking.
This is just, kind of from time to time, staff gets calls from residents about people that aren't moving their vehicles. They park for weeks, months, maybe they'll leave it there for, I don't know, super long time because it's not operating and they need to fix it. Different things are coming up, and we talked about whether the council has any desire, we're curious about that, to implement some sort of limitation, for example, like a 72-hour limit on how long you can park in the street. We did talk to the sheriff's office about that too, just given the kind of the practical considerations that would come with that. They did say they have a method, they can mark tires that wouldn't necessarily prevent somebody from just moving their car across the street or moving it from one part in front of their house maybe 10 feet. But it could curtail some of the people who's, are snowbirds and they leave their car in the street all summer long, or people that are, they have a kid going off to college or something and they don't need a car, so they just park their kid's car in the street and just ignore it forever. And again, at the very least, notwithstanding the difficulty in enforcing it and maybe ticketing people, you could at least get the word out and say that it's unlawful, and it would potentially appease the folks that are complaining, because it's, it gets to be, I guess, bothersome. I don't exactly know why the complaints are coming in and what the issue is, other than, some people just don't like to look at the same car out in front of their house or in their neighborhood every single day for whatever reason. But there could be some more bona fide reasons for it too. I'm not the one taking the complaints.
There's some complaints that are coming in about people with really extended trailers parking in front of people's homes and blocking like entire, like your entire front yard with like your extended big enclosed trailer and things like that. For for
Yeah.
like more than just a day or two. And they're staying there for.
Yep.
People running businesses out of their homes and have a lot of a fleet of work trucks that are parked along the street, so. I don't have any issues with the 72-hour, although I definitely see the downside of not good here, okay, I'm gonna move it 6 feet up. How about here, you know?
Well, at least it moves.
I don't think that it's a silver bullet solution that we're looking for, but I don't think it'll hurt.
Agreed.
Agreed, I like with an ordinance, there's some teeth in it, you know, we can do some follow-up and get a resolution.
Well, then there's something that they can actually tell. So if there's nothing in place and you go up and say, hey, we've got this complaint.
Yeah.
Whatever vehicle A has been sitting here for a month, and they say, well, there's nothing in your ordinance. What are you gonna do about it? Then we say we can't do anything about it. So at least this gives us an option to take care of it if we need to.
I don't know, my concern is, I think about like my family, my husband is, he's in the military, he leaves for 2 weeks every few months. If you are in a situation where you have a resident that's a resident in good standing, and for whatever reason, their garage is full, or there's been an accident and they need the space for something else or whatever, and they have to park their car on the street and they are leaving for a legitimate reason, I mean, we're really backing ourselves to a corner if someone then calls and complains and says, you need to enforce this. And it's like, you want us to tow a resident in good standing's vehicle or ticket their vehicle when there's a reason why it's there and reason why it's not moving? And
I disagree. If your garage is full, that's your own problem. If
Yeah.
your garage is too full, then I guess you better have a garage sale, because you have a garage, you have a driveway, and if you can't just abandon a vehicle on the street for 2 months. I understand that your husband may leave, but you're there, you can move it to.
but not everyone who's in those situations is married. Things.
Then they have a driveway, or then they have to figure out where they're gonna park it.
I think
To me,
too, I have confidence in our police force where I think they'd be compassionate, at least like get a warning first, or like, know the community, and I don't think
Also,
go
we
with
have
it
to be
extreme.
really careful, we have to make,
Yeah,
what we decide on has to be good for everybody, we can't take a look at a resident in good standing. It has
No,
to be
I know,
safe
but-
for your
and what
husband
I am
as Lori's
saying-
husband is.
I'm saying that my argument is that the resident in good standing is a good enough reason not to put, I don't think it's a necessary ordinance. I think it's some people don't like having a car parked in front of their place for a certain period of time, but I don't see why, if it's a public road, I don't see a reason for that, for a passenger vehicle.
I gotta be honest, I'm surprised we didn't have this ordinance. That seems like an oversight in the first place, because we have to have the ability to enforce. I agree with Lori that, a resident with a car is probably gonna have somebody ask a question or maybe give a warning and say, hey, did you know? But we need to have a way to enforce a 20-foot trailer in front of a house for 3 weeks. This just makes sense. It allows us to have teeth when we need it. So I support it.
All right, let's hold off on municipal parking lots until the meeting, if that's okay? Because I think that's gonna require a little more time. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion by Councilmember Frischman,
I'll second.
and a second by Councilmember Mock. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion passes.
Can I ask you a quick question? Do you have a minute?
You have 8
Not
minutes.
in